Chandler, you have no choice. No, integrate. Anyway, so thanks very much for signing up to this session. It's called a masterclass because it sounds cool, but in some ways, I'm bringing to the table something like 20, 30 years of thinking about sustainability, but from the bottom up. Ali Zakri just kind of mentioned that he meets people from the top who are working on climate issues. People want to see lives improving on the ground, but it's a huge divide between them and the communities and ecosystems that we see at the bottom level. And we know that what's sitting in between is business, there's governments, there's all kinds of initiatives. So I think in my mind's eye, it's really about how to align, how to find and build on synergies. So today's workshop is partly about the work that I guess I've done within the RSPO space for a long time, but not to be hung up about individual certifications. But the point is that this sustainability journey was started somewhere in 1990 something. Number two is we have at least a couple of reps from RSPO, so the team members from RSPO themselves. So they'll walk through a little bit about a little bit on the standards, some of the footprints, some of the tools. We'll then take over and start looking at some of the results. So we have some historical data that we can look at. Then is really my dream, because, like I said, I've been doing stuff for 10, 20 years, and I feel I'm at this pivot point where I have to look not at the next year, but where are we going to go in the next 20 or 50 or 100 years from now? So for me, this is what I'm going to present. Some of it may be new, but I think what I realize is that everyone's doing bits and pieces, but we need a way to get into conversations with business to drive that story for the long term. So that's what we'll end with. In between, we'll have some sessions where we can interact with you and stuff. And the very first one will happen now. I think, maybe. Oh, okay, no, maybe let me just quickly just say. So on my side, there's, so Reza, some of you know me, Malaysian, KL, grown, but I think, most of my education has been in the field. So I spent a lot of time in Sabah. Most of my work was centered around creating what is called Wild Asia. And we're still around, it's 20 years old. I'm joined by my colleague, Wenn, who's also a bit nervous because he had to wear a tie. But it also shows you that, we're more comfortable in the kampongs than we are in boardrooms. And then we have two members from RSPO. So there's Ashton and Akmal, which I always forget, so sorry about that. So you'll hear a little bit about them as we progress. Next. So, like all workshops, let's get to know a little bit about where you guys are from. So at least we have some context of, who's in the room and what we can talk to, or things we can build on. So maybe 2 minutes of this whilst I figure out timing. So can you all get in? Yeah.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Wency, so I'll be hosting a bit here and there. So I think we have 29. We should be good to start, yeah? So I think this session is to help us understand who's in the crowd and to see which industry you guys are from. Sorry. All right, so on your phone, you should be able to choose where in the palm oil value chain you guys are at. So I see service providers. Majority of you guys are from other industries. And which industry is that supposed to be? Anyone? Investors. So finance, yeah? Sorry? Huh? Where? Really, I didn't see. All right, so I think we have a pretty diverse crowd right here. We have NGOs, service providers, a lot of others, and 8 producers. So it's nice, yeah. We have a diverse crowd here. We get to hear insights from everyone. Okay, for the second question to help us know more about you, what level of expertise are you guys in your organization?
And I think when people are filling up this next section, those who signed as others, what do you represent, or which part of the industry or side? So we've heard finance sector. Ah, no wonder. Okay, I've been trying to meet you for. Okay, okay, okay. So that's under service. No. Okay, others. Okay, good. Who else in the others? Who clicked others? Now you're all embarrassed. Okay, others. Okay, so banks might be service provider slash others.
I write climate fiction.
You write climate fiction.
Yeah, to look at what the future is going to be like. So I'd love to speak to you about your 20-year vision. Where is palm oil going to go? How do you make the best thing out of palm oil? That'd be cool.
But we shouldn't call it fiction. It's going to be a non-fiction.
No. It's fiction now because it's
Okay,
not happened yet.
Okay, who else in the others? Interesting. Now, okay, others. I'm sure you've got a name.
Insurance.
Insurance. So financial services, service provider of some sort. Okay, cool. Any others? No? Okay, cool.
So we have majority of entry support stuff here. Is that true? Because everyone seems like they're professionals right here. Look at you guys, yeah?
So is it just the terminology thing? Your entry level support is an executive? We don't have administrators here, do we? Okay, who signed entry support staff? So where are you in the spectrum? Students. We don't have students.
Yeah, we don't have students.
Oh, we should have had others. Okay, yeah. Okay, so there's a bunch of students here. Good. Couple. Students. Oh. Asia School of Business. Wales. Okay, but I thought the Wales campus. Not the Wales campus. Okay. I did my PhD at Okay, so all good? So we have Anyway, it's a good demographic. So we got the future, got thinking of the future, and we got some of those in more decision-making positions. So good.
Again, is everyone being humble right now? Everyone's sticking intermediate. JD. All right. So I think we can carry on from here. So we can see that we have a really diverse crowd. Yeah, we have students, we have decision makers, we have admins, we have entry support staff as well. So pretty cool to have everyone here.
So I'm hoping some of the intermediates will be pushed, maybe not into expert space, but you'll feel a bit more confident with some of the knowledge. But otherwise, yeah, it's very good. Thank you very much. Clap for your health, hands. So I think just to sort of set the scene a little bit, I sort of mentioned that I have this longish term history. Next. So one of the things that Wild Asia had positioned themselves in is that we wanted to get away from being donor-driven, and always having to recreate programs every 2 to 3 years. So the idea behind Wild Asia was, let's form this as a social enterprise. And today people are starting to talk about social enterprise, but we were there like 20 years ago. But there wasn't any other peer. So we were like a single lonely fella figuring out something, and maybe it was ahead of the time, I don't know. But the point is that we said, okay, well, if we don't want to just receive funding from grants, what can we do that is relevant? So we took certification as our entry point. In those days, it was actually FSC. So how do you understand FSC and how do you put this into practice? How do you understand RSPO certification and put this into practice? So a lot of you are now integrated into the industry. Some of our staff are now, like Suelee is now with Wilmar. It's becoming a thing. You guys will graduate from uni and become a sustainability executive somewhere. But I found that it wasn't getting to the core of things. And I must say, like, when we put the first non-technical fella in the field, it became the game changer for us. So having a guy who sits in the village allows you to take all the jargon away and be real. What is it of value to the farmer? And how do you take someone on that journey? Next. So in this crazy way, we went from lots of technical assessments, we traveled the world, we were doing stuff in different countries. But the fact is, we were building the teams on the ground. So people in Sabah, almost all of them are Sabahan, so they are either born in the state, some are farmers themselves, some are from the community. And I think that was a very important part of our building block. So we're doing this now in different parts of not just Malaysia, but we've also got a foothold now in Thailand. But what's enabled this to kind of grow is essentially connecting to the business. So the idea of connecting to global brands became our starting point, because when we go to the national corporates, a lot of them say, "Oh no, it's money. I can't spend money now, and I got no returns. And why are we doing this?" So it became very difficult to get things moving. You need money. So we created this space, and now we have scale. We have teams on the ground, and things are giving us more visibility about how we can translate sustainability from the ground through the supply chain and make sure that this is part of business, is how you should be doing business. So I think that's our role now in terms of educating, but also in terms of model building with real businesses, the same way that we model build with farmers. Next. Okay, next. Next. So I think, you know, there's not going to be many Menti things left, but I just thought, like, before we frame climate thingies, I mean, just you know, where you've got solutions and where we're going to show results, just take a moment to think about what have been some of the major events over the last 20, 30 years, and see whether you can put dates to them. So you can think back in terms of timeline, like how far back are some of these discussions happen and how far have we come? Over to you.
Okay, for now, we have 5 questions for you guys regarding what are the major climate actions that have been taken in the past 30 years, right? So this quiz, it's actually ranked. So whoever answers the fastest and has the correct answer, you'll be top of the leaderboard. Sadly, we have no gifts or anything for you guys, but all right, I think we can get started. We have 30, 31. Anyone else is still joining? Anyone else? Anyone else? All right. Okay, so for the first major climate action is the Earth Summit that was held in Rio. So you can look at the notes to help you guys understand what does it entail. And all you need to choose is the year that it was held in. Does anyone know? If no one knows, let's take a good guess, yeah?
How do you know if everybody has answered?
We have 32.
Oh, 31, okay.
Yeah, 31, yeah.
Where's the 32? Okay, 33. Oh, there's more.
Wait, how many do we have? 36?
I thought it was 31.
33. All right, then I guess we are at the right amount. Who is leading? Who is CC? Oh, it's close. It's close. Who's CC? Okay. Who's Zakri? Oh, at the same table as well. Are you guys sharing answers? And who's the third one? Who's Strawberry? Who's Strawberry? You're Strawberry! Wow. Okay, so I think we have a pretty close race right here. We have 4 more questions to go. All right. For the second question. So this is the COP3, which was held in Kyoto, and this was the first legally binding emission agreement. And yeah, this was also the year that Malaysia signed, and then we later ratified the Kyoto Protocol. So any answers? Any answers? We have 5 more to go. 5 more. Yeah, I wanted to give everyone more time.
This is like too confident, like.
All right, 1, 2, 3. We're skipping.
Yeah.
Is it still CC on top? No, you got it wrong.
Oh no.
Zakri. Who's Zam? Who's Zam? Zam. Okay, all the way in the back. Chasing up, chasing up. Casper? Who's Casper? Casper. Vote gold. Who's vote gold? Who's vote gold? Ooh, vote gold. All right, let's skip to the next one. So for the third question that we have.
Okay, third question will do 30 seconds.
Okay, 30 seconds. This is on the MPCC. So this is a Malaysian policy. Any answers for it? 1. Okay, I'll count down from 5, yeah? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Skipping it? Vote gold. Zam is leading now. Oh, I think we're starting to see some differentiation in the marks, yeah, in the leaderboard.
30 seconds, next one.
Now we have the launch of the SBTI. All right, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, Zam, how do you know so much? I think you're getting almost every answer correct, yeah?
Are you on the student side or you're on the Bank Negara side? Huh? Maybank is quite happening.
All right, for the last question, this is your chance. The IPCC 1.5 degree. This was when they moved the target from 2 degrees to 1.5. 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Zam got it wrong. Zam. Okay, no, he's still winning. All right. Thank you everyone for being so cooperative.
Okay,
And
we'll give you
again-
maybe a certificate to bring back to Maybank. So I chose these for a reason. So one theme was where governments started coming together and saying, we got to do something. But that was 1992. So 20, 25 years, okay, my maths is bad. So a long time ago, government started. And then along the way, corporate said, oh, shit, things aren't working. Or maybe there's more pressure from their shareholders or maybe their consumers. And SBTI started to come into play. But for corporate Malaysia, they said SBTI not relevant, international, so I think the big shift that I saw was when it became part of national reporting, Bursa Malaysia started taking things up. So different things like that is making this language, the fact that a Bank Negara fella can score the top in terms of knowledge, recall of the stuff, it's a remarkable difference. 20 years ago, I walked into an estate and I was explaining to them greenhouse gases and how to report and where the major emissions are or whatever. And then I had a hand which popped up at the back and it said, sir, what is a greenhouse? And do you know why? I mean, I didn't laugh at him. I didn't say, oh, you're so uneducated. But the main point was that when you live in a tropical environment, you don't know what a greenhouse is. You don't live with a greenhouse. So sometimes we adopt things and we say that these are big global things that are important, but if you can't localize it into language that makes sense, you're not going to get very far. So I think this is really, my kind of takeaway from all this, that we can adopt global standards, policies, etc., but you have to understand what does it mean in your context and what does success look like. And I think that's something to keep at the back of your mind. So I'm going to pass you over to our colleagues from RSPO, and I think we let them introduce this. So now remember in your timelines, 2005 or 2022-ish, RSPO was born. The idea behind it. First standard was 2025. So the first COP was 1994. So you could see like there were parallel things that were happening. But carbon wasn't their only piece. They were trying to deal with a whole bunch of different things. I'll hand you over to the team.
So hi everyone. We've got 3 people from RSPO here. Ashton, Akmal, myself. I'm HS. So RSPO was started in 2004, but the seeds behind RSPO actually really date back to 1997 and 98. And if you remember what happened in 97 and 98, yes, there was the initial financial crisis, but we also had the haze. The first time that we had that kind of huge haze issue that was an intersection between open burning practices that have been practiced in the region for a while, but a super El Nino. I was in high school at that point, and I remember being a pengawas and having to do traffic control and not being able to see more than a meter in front of me. And we had the school issued all this mask and everything. But that was the seeds behind it. So the industry realized that these sum of practices were contributing to climate. Something needed to be done. And in 2004, after a long conversation, the founding members of RSPO came together, and they represented the different sectors that are connected with palm oil supply chain. We had MPOA, the Malaysian Palm Oil Association, representing the growers. We had AAK Trading, which is a very large trader of palm oil in Europe. We had Unilever, who's a consumer goods manufacturer. I'm sure everyone knows them. We also had Migros, which was a Swiss retailer chain. And finally, we had WWF. And coming together and forming the RSPO in 2004, representing the multi-stakeholder process. So RSPO being a multi-stakeholder process that really tries to bring everyone together and agree on the path forward for sustainable palm oil, and to also shine a light for sustainable agriculture in general, with the founding of the first standard, the pilot standard in 2005, which was adopted for general application in 2007, and we're now on our 4th iteration of the standard, which was just passed last November. So kind of what we're trying to do is the theory side of things. If we set a standard that's applicable globally, that touches on multiple aspects of sustainability, not just climate, but also on social, and we balance that with the idea of economic resilience and the fact that the industry itself needs to not just be sustainable in terms of practices, but sustainable as a business itself, that is the path forward. And we've set our standards to tackle different aspects of this, individually, but also interconnectedly in a holistic manner. And what Ashton and Akmal will do will be introducing some of the different elements in the standard that are targeted specifically either directly or indirectly at climate change. So Akmal, do you want to introduce the standard?
Thanks, HS. Thank you, Reza, for giving us the foundation lay of the land before we jump into a more technical side of things. But before that, let me just quickly introduce ourselves. This is Ashton. My name is Akmal. Both of us were from the standards team inside RSPO. So what does that mean is that when it comes to what we are seeing our members do from the producer side, which is the upstream all the way to downstream players, we are looking at different sets of standards, including the one that we use for independent smallholders. So the differentiation between me and Ashton is that I look into forest and biodiversity related portfolio, whatever that we put inside our standards. But Ashton over here, she is looking slightly more into the carbon accounting side of things. We have Palm GHG that we will speak a bit on later. but this is how we structure ourselves, at least from the standards point of view. So I think when it comes to climate governance and the things that we have been discussing throughout this theme, I guess one important thing that we need to kind of like bear in mind before we go into the more technical discussion is that when we look at standards per se, we are looking at production of palm oil without damaging the environment, reduce your emission and stuff like that. But a lot of other conversations, they will naturally pop up. Like, how do you take care of your soil? What if you have orangutans in your area? What if you have tigers? So that kind of stuff is very interesting, but at the same time, we, from the standards point of view, there's also the pros and cons that we are trying to address. So without further ado, Ashton, would you like to take us through?
Thank you so much, Akmal and HS. And here I am today. So before we go into how we're going to do in terms of action from the palm oil industry, I'm here to introduce you what is RSPO standards, okay, the theory part of it. And then after that, I will pass it to Akmal to share with you on the topic that why you're here today, how RSPO standards actually avoid degradation of carbon sink. So RSPO standards sets global standards for sustainable palm oil. We have different type of standards. PNCs are the one that is for growers and mills, okay, the first one. And then we also have standards for independent smallholders. And we also have the downstream side to ensure sustainable palm oil across the supply chain, which is the RSPO supply chain certification standards. So these are the latest one that is published on our website. But here we are. We have the 2024 that has been shared by HS earlier that we will take you through today. Okay, so you can see from our RSPO standards, 8.1% of supply from 1% of land. So RSPO certification, so those members who actually applied certification of RSPO represents 1.0% of the global vegetable crop. Okay, and out of that, it is 8.1% of the global vegetable oil supply. And how we actually do this, we have in RSPO, we have this theory of change that guides us through towards a global partnership to make palm oil sustainable. And here we are, we have our standards, certifications, and assurance that are the drivers to provide us the output towards sustainable palm oil. And earlier on, this is the very detailed theory of change. We have a simplified version of the revised RSPO theory of change, which was just revised last year. And if you're interested, you can go to our website here to see the details of it. Okay, going into the RSPO standards. So first, I will share with you the 2024 RSPO principles and criteria that is for the growers and also the mills. So what about RSPO PNC 2024? Like I said, it is for palm oil and palm oil products worldwide, okay? And we have 7 principles for those who are not familiar with our RSPO PNC 2024. And here today, we are only going to touch upon Principle 7, which is related to climate change. And this PNC 2024, it will be effective this year on 13 November of 2025. Okay, out of Principle 7, so what does Principle 7 covers? So it requires the growers to protect, conserve, and enhance ecosystem as responsible environmental stewards. So what are the changes that we have in our latest RSPO standards? We actually enhance our system to promote an efficient management of high conservation values and high carbon stock forests. Okay, it might be very technical. I will let Akmal take it on later. While we also protect not just the environment, but the social impacts, okay, when it comes to sustainable palm oil. And also, apart from that, we have the greenhouse gas, where we start monitoring the impact towards the environment. And out of this Principle 7, we actually have 7 criteria that you can see in the circle. and the ones that are just pop up. So these are the ones that are directly related to our topic today that we were gonna share with you. Okay, so we have peatland, greenhouse gas emission and deforestation. And I'm from the GAG unit, so I'll share more on GAG, and then Akmal will take the management side of things. Okay, into criterion 7.6. So the main thing that we actually look at in this criterion is to measure the impact of GAG emission and also the carbon stock. How do we protect this forest? And when it comes to GAG, the thing that you would come to mind is prevention of fire as well as reducing fossil fuel on the ground. Okay, so these are the main 3 indicators that are highlighted in 7.6 that shows how we actually help them, right? Putting up just in requirements is not enough. So we actually help our members by having Palm GAG calculator that you can see in 7.61. And also we also have tools if any members want to have new planting, how do we actually protect this carbon sink? Okay, so these are just the other indicators that related to fire and fossil fuel. I won't go into detail of it. So I just want to introduce you. This is the baby, the Palm GAG calculator that we have in RSPO to calculate emissions. So what it is a tool to help the members to monitor and also to estimate their greenhouse gas emissions, okay? But it's only for the growers and the mills, okay? And who developed it? Since we're at the NCGS, the climate governance, so we would want to also share with you the governance at RSPO. So it's developed by Greenhouse Gas Working Group. Now it's currently known as GAG Task Force. So who they are? So these are our members. So they're made up of our producers and processors. They are also our growers, and we also have NGOs in the task force that actually help to develop our Palm GAG calculator. So you can see there are a lot of work that is being done by our task force right now, not just Palm GAG, but also the new development side of the tool. So this is the journey of Palm GAG. So we started way back 2009, that they think that we need to measure the emissions. So here we are today. We have the version 5 that will be up in Q3 this year. And how we actually improve it, we aligned it with international reporting frameworks, especially the GAG protocol standards. And in GAG protocol, just to share with you, there are 3 scopes that's covered under GAG protocol. The one that is directly managed by the company are scope 1 and scope 2. And along the supply chain, it's your scope 3 from your downstream and also your upstream. And this regarding to add on to what we have in our version 5. So besides aligning with GAG protocol, we are also helping our members to estimate the avoided emissions from conservation, especially from your carbon sink. And we're having digitalization, and also the most important thing, getting verified and ensure integrity of your data, of your GAG emissions. So what are other RSPO criteria related to GAG emissions? As you can see, this is gotten from our latest report, our impact report, and the highest actually come from other areas, actually, activities in the ground, like POME, land use, you can see here fertilizers and peatland. And we have other criteria that covers this area. As you can see, we break it down into emission reduction, where these are all the activities from the ground, and these are the avoided emissions, the carbon sink side. Okay. Okay, so the impact so far in our PNC standards, we actually avoided an amount of 470. Our cumulative GAG emissions is around 2 million metric ton. That equates to 470 cars avoided since 2015. And we also have an average of 3.2 ton CO2 per metric ton of CPO. That is by our members, okay, which is lower, almost half of it report to less than 1.0 ton of carbon CO2 metric ton or less. So half of our members actually have lower emissions as compared to non-certified RSPO. And we also have avoided fire risk and also ensure environmental sustainability. Okay, going to independent smallholder standards. So this standards is actually for the smallholders, the growers, the small growers on the ground who also wish to contribute to sustainable palm oil. And the one that covered under environment, it's principle 4. Okay, so there are more because we break it down more into details when it comes to smallholders. And these are the one that is related to climate change. So we actually covered HCV, HCS, RSCP, Akmal will share with you what is it, and new planting, best management practices on planting on peat, as well as flood risk assessment. So GHG emission for independent smallholders, in RSPO, we don't have a standalone criterion on GHG emissions like you see in the PNC standards, but we have integrated a lot of specific criteria into peatland management, fire prevention, and pesticide regulation. And this is because, as you know, as for small growers, it's difficult for them to do a lot of activities, right? Asking them to manage all this is already tough. What more to say to calculate their emissions? So from that, we actually have a prevention where through our criteria, that they have more criterion on avoiding emissions on the ground and then reducing the emissions. Okay. And here is just a overall impact that we have for our independent smallholders. So we actually improve lives and operations, protect. So I think everyone would be more interested in this, how much that we actually protect for our certified independent smallholders. So up close to 7,000 hectares that is being conserved by far. And also we ensure 400,000 hectares of our smallholder plants certified, which is larger than the entire oil palm production of Ghana. Okay. I hope everyone is clear on our standards. I know this is a bit dry when it comes to theory, you know. So I think I'll pass it on to Akmal to share with you how we actually avoid degradation of carbon stocks. Carbon sink.
Hi again. So before this I didn't do anything about palm oil at all. I was in a conservation project type of background, so I always wanted to know, like, now I'm handling forests, how can that be done? So I've always wanted something fast, but that is not the case when it comes to stakeholder engagements, like most of you will be aware of. But looking at forest and how our approach is going to look like when it comes to supply chain and value chains, it's easier if you think about it as a grower or a smallholder yourself. Like, you want to commit to palm oil, sustainable palm oil. How would that look like? So when you look at, you don't have to worry about the words on the sides, but you look at all these items in the wheel. Sorry. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, we have a cumulative of 50 hectares. So in the smallholder context, you're not like individual grower plantation. In a smallholder context, you would form a smallholder group for you to get one certificate. So one certificate will have like multiple names, but it can be an individual as well. Correct. So, but we have a threshold of, like, for independent smallholders, 50 hectares cumulatively speaking. Yeah. Right. So when you want to get into the system, we have to go through a process of due diligence. That is comprising of the social side and also the environmental side. That will kind of like open up the discussion of, okay, how do you define forest? What do you see forest is like in your framework? So this is what we have right now as as part of the due diligence. You will need to check whether you have forest in your operations or not. That is where your high conservation values and high carbon stock forests. I'll go into that a bit more later. And then you will need to check whether or not your operations, your area of operations, does it involve any peatlands? Because that obviously would, increase your emissions level to a crazy amount. You have riparian reserves, steep terrain, fragile marginal soils, and lastly, the RACP, which I will touch later. So, how do you identify forest from a RSPO point of view? Because I'm pretty sure a lot of people in this room, we know that when it comes to definition of forest, it varies across the industry. We have AFI, we have FAO definition. When it comes to UDR, we have another definition. So how does the RSPO look into defining what forest is? So as our methodology evolves across the years since 2013, we are looking at it at a qualitative evaluation or methodology. So we have high conservation value, and we have assessors to look into, okay, whether we should conserve this area or not. And on top of that, we have, in 2018, we have incorporated the fact that before you get into our system, you need to check first whether any of your areas, even though if there is no values for you to conserve it, but if it's high carbon stock within that area, you have to preserve it. So to a certain extent, our definition, the qualitative approach expands sometimes to a certain extent more than what a normal forest is. Say, for example, that area is very valuable for a certain community, it needs to be preserved, even though it doesn't really look like a forest. So this is the kind of approach or stance that we are making with the new standards. And on top of that, we are now looking at a single methodology or an approach to look into whether or not your forest needs to be preserved or not. Why we have this small iteration or small modification is because in the previous standards in 2018, there is a specific clause or indicator to say that there are certain countries, frontier countries like Gabon, Liberia, with all these high forest cover countries, there will be a specific methodology or approach that you can use. But now it applies across the board. There's only one, and we have, like what Ashton mentioned earlier, we have verifiers, third-party verification bodies, so that everything is covered properly. But what I want you to also take into consideration when we talk about governance and how sustainability is being practiced inside the context of standards, this is how we are structuring the forest and carbon sink side of the standard. Essentially, the first thing that you need to do is to identify, like I mentioned just now, based on your due diligence, which part is your go zone, which part is your no-go zone. Once you have that, this is where your historical clearance and liability come in. You have to understand when you want to get into the RSPO system, you need to declare, oh, I've done deforestation in the past, what do I do next? Because in the standards perspective, we don't want to bar people from entering to a system that is doing something good, but at the same time, we need a methodology or a measure so that whatever clearance in the past can be somehow remediated. So RACP, the remediation and compensation procedure, this is one methodology that we are looking at. Okay, and then once you identify whether you have forest or not, your go no go zone, you have identified whether or not you have liability. Then you go into your management and monitoring. What this means is that you look into, now that I have X amount of hectares to conserve, what do I do with it? Once you know what to do, this is where your continuous improvements happen. Like if you know for a fact there are animals in the forest, you need to make sure you do certain things to maintain it. As years go by, you need to continuously monitor and improve your plan. And by default, we also need to continue looking at the rights of affected communities within our conservation areas. And this is how the framework is telling our members to do. So as it stands now, we are looking at more than 450,000 hectares that are being conserved. within the current framework and the current data. So when it comes to RSCP, this is the kind of framework that we are looking at. We are looking at people who have, or members who have cleared lands in the past, and what is it that they need to do? They need to do remediation, social remediation, and also conservation compensation. And how you do it, that is, once you get into the system, everything will be guided. So other than that, I mentioned that peatland would increase your emissions by a large amount. So that's why our approach is more on the due diligence, so that the prevention happens first, rather than you come into the system, but then you have to do so many things to remediate. So this is why we are emphasizing on peatland, and also when it comes to riparian zones, we have water management in our other criteria, so that everything falls into the place. For new planting, like for example, you already are in the system and then you want to expand your land, for example, again, the due diligence approach kicks in, whereby we have multiple methodologies that we need to put in place, so that at least we know what we're up against. And when it comes to GHG, like what Ashton mentioned earlier, when you want to do something new, something big, you have to assess first, and we have provided the tools for it. So yeah, I'm gonna skip this part for now, but essentially my main takeaways would be, when you look into the standard side of things, we first start with whether or not you want to commit to doing what's right for the environment. You would need to look into the due diligence side of things. So that's why, like, when it comes to protection of carbon sink, we have multiple things that we put in place, just because we want to emphasize on prevention first. So, and then the guidance and what other components that we put into the system is probably aimed towards how resilient can you be in the future once you get into the system, and other things that you want to do within your current membership. There are other requirements to help you report and do well in the supply and value chain. So I hope that somehow covers a lot of things from our end. Reza, back to you.
Yeah, okay, no, very good. Thank you very much. So we'll have some questions later, no problem. So make note. We'll take it at the end. I think what's clear is the RSPO sets a sort of filter where there's some checking, due diligence, etc., etc. So it allows people who are clear of drama, problems, or things that they can clearly do before they enter the program. And in some ways, this creates, a lot of people say, oh, it's like a niche. So I think, it's like 30% of world's palm oil is RSPO certified, or 30, 40%, something like this. So often the question is then, what happens to the 60%? And how do we move them along? So this is really the sort of gap between the top movers, where we can learn, and once they're in a program, you've got all these standards that if everybody follows everything, things are starting to get better. But that's 60%. What does one do? So I think before we kind of frame this, next slide. Just a few scary moments, news reports which started to pop up. And if you think about like the fires we had in California, there's fires in Japan, there's fires everywhere. Places that you didn't quite imagine would happen is happening. And then on the other side, to receive news like this, like all of those forest areas that we have protected, the marine ecosystem, which is quite a major carbon sink, are not functioning. That should scare you, because the planet doesn't have another 20, 30 years. It's already here. Climate change is here. Next. And the other scary news is that you know, there have been people around, I can't remember when the planetary boundaries were starting. That was like 2020-ish. So around that time, some scientists sat together and said, like, the world, our ecosystem to live in has limits. And they broke it down into 9 planetary boundaries. But we more or less have overshot 6 of the 9. Next. No, next. Sorry. No. Go back to the planetary boundary. Okay, yeah. The dots. So industrial agriculture hits just about all the major areas. So if you think about what is industrial agriculture, think large-scale anything in agriculture, corn, oil palm, etc. You're going to hit all these trigger points. Next. So it sort of led me thinking, and also when you look back at history and you kind of start understanding that the world has been shaped by our colonial past. The way of globalized trade sets its roots back 300, 400, 500 years ago. But Malaysia is a classic case of, you know, we've been influenced by the colonial mindset, and it's been an industrial mindset. So if you look at the textbooks in the UK and stuff, you know, we're so happy about the Industrial Revolution, and you know, the key guys, the engineers. But when you have, you know, my realization today is, oh shit, all those problems and the misery is because we've adopted this model. And the more I think about what regenerative models should be, it is about business transformation. It's about how we need to rethink so many different things. And it's not about lip service time because we have no time. Next. Now, if I put this in the context of what is the footprint of palm oil today, from 1800s, late 1800s, it started as a food for slaves destined for the UK and for America. So it was feeding slaves to sustain themselves for those long journeys. And at some point that became not acceptable. And then they said, well, what else can we do? We've got all this, you know, we know there's palm oil there. So there's a fellow called Lee Brothers sitting in Liverpool who said, I can make soap out of this. So that became the first basis behind the first industrial use of a commodity. And it has its roots all the way back then. Today, that footprint sits at about, 20, I can't remember, I think there's some stats here on about 20 million hectares of land now sit under oil palm globally. It's not just a Malaysian crop. And in Malaysia alone, you're looking at 5 million hectares of this. So 5 billion hectares of land is cultivated under oil palm, and more or less 90% of this follows that industrial model. But this is the engine behind such a wide range of industries. So all the big, so from food companies to oleochemicals, it supports so many consumer goods products that you can't escape this. Like anywhere in the world, there's so many different things which are fueled by palm oil. But we rarely sit back and think where our stuff comes from. Next. Back. Show the palm tree. Maybe let me control it. I think you're like too excited. So, you know what okay, this may not be a big typical estate. There's a smallholder. But when I look at this, I see different things probably to you guys. What do you see when you look at this? Well managed, beautiful. Just tell me, give me a keyword. What's the one thing when you see this? Monoculture. No biter, but there's a tree. Okay, what else? But botanically, it's a tree. Structurally, plant physiology, no, plant structurally is a tree. But it's a palm, correct. It's a palm tree. What else do you guys think? Anybody else? Where's Zam, the Bank Nagara fella? Maybank fella. What do you see when you see this? Trees. Okay, what else? Sometimes when I show this, people go, oh, that's like my father's kabun. Or, there's like other associations with this. Just been harvested. How do you know this? You've got very sharp eyes. Yeah. So, but when I look at this, I see little diversity. And it's interesting, I've been in like from big planters' times, a lot of them say, I have to keep it clean because the advisor is going to come and scold us if they cannot see down the oil palm row. So that's been that's something that they learned in estate management school coming down from colonial fellas. But it was a management tool. If you can't see, that means you have a poorly and unkept block, and that was a problem. I was with a village in Sarawak where we talked about this, and the fella says, my wife gives me hell if I don't have my farm as clean as this. So there's different perspectives of why they do different things. But clearly people don't see this as a problem, but it comes because of management decisions. I have to use chemicals or my wife is nagging me. Number two is often related to the overuse of glyphosate. It's the number one biggest thing, and people don't realize it's just a part of, go to the estate. They all say it's like a normal chemical that they use. But look in the literature and you'll find that glyphosate is also a chelating agent. Now, what is a chelating agent? Anybody? It binds heavy metals. So what does the plant need? The micronutrients are little bits of heavy metals. So if the chemicals are binding your metals, where are you going to get it from? So put in more fertilizers. And then there's other problems that come with it. And this is the classic. So I now go to the field with a shovel because you can see what the soil is going to be like even before you dig it. But it's a good practice to go in and use your shovel because you find that it's huge, almost guaranteed compacted. It means it's dead. It's like this. This one is ex-mining land. So the smallholder has got the ex-mining land because there's no other land available. And so this one is tin mining. So that's why the white color. But the point is that most soils are like this, which means that it's dead. Rain will fall. It cannot go down into the ground. And where does it go? To the rivers and to floods and all this. So think 5 million hectares. How much of this is contributing to all our flood problems? Because the soils are dead. And then when you add it all up from a carbon emissions perspective, add all of these things up, these are on the high emission scale. I mean, maybe comparable to everybody else, but doesn't mean it's good. But that's one of the realities. So then the other thing which we start seeing is, at the end of that 24-year cycle, we start all over again. We bulldoze everything up again. And whatever biodiversity that you've built up over 20 years is gone. And Suelee has been at the front line. So some of our early work was go and sample the rivers downstream and see if there's any biodiversity in these rivers. And the answer is no, it's all gone. So the effect is not just in the soils, but then the ecosystems which we all are dependent on, which is the rivers and the lifeblood of our ecosystem. So given all this, we said, well, what can we do about this? Because that's the norm. And we can have the best standards, but if you can't implement this, then it's not going to go anywhere. So one of our first starting points was almost 5, 6 years ago. We said, let's look back at the data. So this, I think I'll just let Wency do this session. So we just picked 19 or 20 different mills, RSPO mills, because they disclosed their information. And then we just plotted it on a map and just thought, okay, well, what does the variation look like? So we'll let him reveal this.
All right, so I'll be expanding a bit on what carbon footprinting looks like for a palm oil mill. So I think Ashton and Akmal have explained quite a bit on it, so I'll just expand more on the results that we have. So we're looking at the emissions from the scope 1 to scope 3. So as Ashton has mentioned before, your scope 1 emissions are your direct emissions, right? So from a palm oil mill's standpoint, the average carbon emission for a mill, it's about 3.4 kg of CO2 for every CPO that is produced, right? And what does this consist of? What is contributing to this? So for the scope 1 emissions, these are all your direct emissions that come from on-site sources or farms that you own yourself. And this would account for 25 to 35% generally of your emissions, right? So what is under your direct emissions? So for a palm oil's view, you would have your boiler emissions, right? You would have your transport emissions, and you have POME emissions as well, if you don't have biogas capture in place. So if you have your own internal estates or you have farms that you own yourself, your FFB production or your oil palm cultivation, those process their emissions and they are considered under scope 1 as well. So that includes your fertilizer use, chemical usage, land use change, and also peat oxidation, right? So for the next scope, so scope 2, these are your energy usage. So this accounts for a smaller amount, so it's about 0 to 5%. So this is how much electricity you use. And looking at the mills in Malaysia these days, a majority of them, they're using biogas, biomass boilers. So if it's self-sustaining, you could easily get to 0%. So this is a smaller portion of it. So what about the larger portion that we're looking at? So we're looking at the scope 3 emissions, which are your indirect emissions. And this comes from your supply chain. So this is where it overlaps a bit with your scope 1, the emission factors that are in scope 1. So the farms or your suppliers that are out of your control, you don't own them, those emissions would come under scope 3. So let's take a look at some of the results that we have. So we're using a sample size of 19 mills across Malaysia and Indonesia. And this is done based on RSPO GHG version 4's model. So if we see here along the graph, most of the mills, majority of them, they are all along the same band, right? So the number distribution is normal, but sometimes you get outliers. Look at that last mill. Mill S, he's sitting at 9.5, which is way out of scale comparing to the rest, right? So even though there's a model for calculating your emissions, you would still discover that sometimes you get a lot of outliers, or maybe things like this. So let's zoom into scope 1 and 2 emissions. So this is emission per FFB, yeah? So if you look at mill N, again, there's an outlier, which is different from what we are seeing previously, right? So under scope 1 and 2, again, you see everyone is along the curve, but you get outliers as well. So if we compare them side by side, so let's take mill N as an example, yeah? So for his emission per CPO, he's sitting at 0.89, but for his emission per FFB under scope 1 and 2, he's sitting at 12.88. So you might wonder, why is his scope 1 and 2 so high, but his emission per CPO is much lower, right? So that's because he has more sink than the rest, right? He's sequestering more than he's emitting, yeah? So I think that's all from my side. I'll let Dr. Reza recap a bit on the findings.
So I think what he's trying to say is that the fact is that this is a large concessionaire in Indonesia. Maybe he didn't say that, but so this was a company in Indonesia, so he has large concession, and within their concession they have forest areas. So those forest areas offset the high FFB emissions which is coming from fertilizer and all the other stuff. But it's such a huge difference of being able to offset that. But you can see just generally for most people, they are within that range of at least under 2 kilograms per hectare or per metric ton of CPO. Does anybody have any questions around this, these charts? But basically, we wanted to know, we just wanted to know just overall trends, just looking back at a bit of history. Yes? Yes, because the unit of certification RSPO is the mill and their supply base. One big company. Correct. And actually that's one thing. The standard is standard, but you need people to operationalize them and make sense of them and drive that forward. They have published reports. So everything is in the public domain, but they were doing this, actually, because RSPO has been doing it for a while, you actually have data. The complication thing is, version 4 is not the same as version 5, and then to compare is a bit of a headache. So you actually need academics to tell you how to compare them, which is another story. Sorry, we have, okay.
Palm GHG is not version, the scope 3 completes. Scope 3 is very difficult. We are scope 1, scope 2 complete, partial scope 3 because we include the countries of origin and the transportation of fertilizer. But scope 3 is very complicated because you need the entire downstream and the entire upstream but we're working towards that. And version 5 of Palm GHG is an attempt to move from a bespoke methodology to one that's aligned with GHG protocol, so that it standardizes what we're reporting and it can be reused in other reporting contexts.
Yeah, so that's going to be good.
To use the mic?
Sorry, thank you. Sorry, my question is, did you have the opportunity to engage with this company? I mean, despite the fact that it has forests, very fortunate of them to be able to offset, something is clearly not right with the way they are operating because it's way off the average.
Yeah, so then I go from general to specific. But I didn't go specifically to build N. Okay, we can take the rest later. Oh, you got one more.
That this unit of certification has peat. They have either drained peat or they have compacted their peat. And peat, as Akmal mentioned, is a huge swing factor. The minute you have peat within Palm GHG calculation, it can go up into double digits. Yeah, so it's a risk factor that we point out. The calculator is meant for companies to identify risk areas of emissions. And the standard then, if necessary, has requirements to address those risks.
I'm glad you say that because I think what you find here is these are companies which are probably old enough, so the units of certification cleared the standards deadline, but the reality is they're still sitting on peat. So the fact is that once you know what's underlying this, the data, you can start to say, well, actually, your big problem here is peat. This is why you stand out versus everybody else. The fun thing, okay, this is where like my geeky side will come in, like, yeah, we should go and see mill N, because how can we get this to move down? And if we can show results, that's exciting. So that's how I got to, so just, where am I pointing? So that's, so good question. We should be talking not to the industry as a whole, but we should be talking to individual mills, because each individual mill or mill group will have its own context. So I'm the harbinger of bad news, but sometimes I bring you insights. Not my insights, but these are people who've been working on reduction stories in corporates and governments and stuff like this. And they basically said, look, you know, forget about 2 and 3. If everybody focuses on 1, we should be okay. So policy-wise, what does that mean is the mill scope 1, I don't see as an issue, because most of the biogas, POMI, whatever, these are things that industry have already started to address. Scope 1 for an estate is going to be your operational part. Now that's going to be the interesting challenge to unlock, like you see with the peat story. So what I did was I was thinking about this as, how do we join the dots? But each part of the value chain essentially has a different set of activities that need to happen. Choreographing this is a bit of a nightmare when you deal with listed companies, you deal with families, you deal with smaller mills. Everybody's asking you, why, if I do this, do I make money? You know, it's like this is constantly, it is a complicated environment to deal in. But that's where I'm trying to position a strategy. But the first thing which I realize is there's not many companies who can talk about being not just net zero, negative. And so far, there's been one company out of Latin America that has said this. And then recently I saw P&G has announced, I've got this carbon negative product. So again, it must be complicated to get there. But at least that sets a direction. Strategy-wise, how do we get there? And part of this is adopting reporting frameworks. So I think that's a no-brainer. The part which I see what's hidden in all this is people are having lots of reports, but they can't make sense of it. They can't operationalize it. How does that link to operations is the headache which I see. And in some ways, there are things which are very clearly things that mills are within their reach to deal with. And there's maybe one thing here on biochar and carbon removals, but this is clearly a space where a lot of the bigger boys have said, you know, we've done the math. It just doesn't make sense. And I don't see any value from doing it. But we're sort of showing from the smallholders' perspective that actually there's value to do it. So I think there's a communication gap of trying to figure out how to present this as a business case for a mill. But that's something that we're starting to get into. The other part is dealing with suppliers who are not under your ownership. And when you deal with a commodity like palm, this is a common problem. I mean, we work with mills in Thailand, same thing. 99% comes from external crop. So if you don't know how to work with that divide, you will never solve this problem. So that's the second area. And it's somewhat related to this. And I think that traceability is now, like, people are talking about this apps and da-da-da-da-da. But the point is that once you have traceability, what do? Does that help you build relationships with the producers? Usually it's no. So that's the opportunity. And I think that brings me to the ultimate opportunity, which is to get to helping your suppliers make more money and make extra money. And it doesn't matter if it's your own company or somebody outside. These are exciting things that we can potentially do. But you're not going to get the benefits if you can't report this through your supply chain or report this to the fellow who's buying to you on the other side of the world. So there's a lot of complicated pieces that need to be joined up. So at least from our side, we said, we found some starting points. And we said, rather than look at all your mills or look at industry mills, let's look at your mill. Let's look at this mill. And we started this reporting cycle. So this is having a synergized carbon reporting tool. This could, so we had to then work with other consultants to figure out that if the result is X, where do we stand? And this is how we know, at least benchmark, where do we stand, meaning the estate in relation to industry benchmarks now becomes possible. At least you know where you are. Are you bad or are you worse? Are you in the middle? The other thing was then seeing the big difference between your crop and the external crop. And it's almost an 80% gap. Is it 80%? I don't know where I got 80%. It was 80% less or 89% less emissions. But that's partly to do with the fact is the supplier's data comes to you as averages of the industry. And why is because you can't collect the fella's information, because you don't know where the fella is. So you see where the conundrum comes in. So if you can unlock those pieces, now you can start to report your external suppliers in a more better light. So it begins to start, it becomes something you can start to see how a reduction might look like. So then the other thing we did is, the other problem we found, especially when you work with lots of smallholders, is a lot of the farm emissions data is dependent on someone's record. And in a state record, maybe you've got 80, 90%, you're okay. I say that because that 20% could be the fellow reported to the wrong field, or maybe the fertilizer type was wrong, or something like there's some errors in it. Smallholders even worse. So we started to look at, so we've got a 3-year trial running. We're on to year 2. But basically we said, let's forget about paper records. Let's just look at this from a remote sensing perspective. So we're actually monitoring farm emissions in an actual basis on a day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month, year-to-year. And this gives us then historical records. So we can go back 20 years, and it just allows us to do this in a much easier way. The other thing with this is, Suelee, what is NEE? I have no idea. Okay. Because you guys have seen it. Or is it that? So what is that ecosystem exchange? It's the sum of your sequestration and emissions. So if you see it's on the negative range, don't be scared, it's okay. But if you're closer to 0, that means more drama. You want to get further away from 0 than possible. That's correct, right? So then, so the reason why I showed this was replanting events happen every 20, 25 years. So I was interested to know, we know there'll be less emissions, less sequestration, so obviously more emissions, but by how much? And in this case, there was a small plot, 200 hectares, and what we find is that clearly it's less than the average. It's almost around 3 to 4, say 4 kgs per hectare. So I'm not sure at which point are we going to see this increasing again. So I have to keep extending the study just to see what's the effect going to be, or to look at other plots so that we can start to look at this trend. But why am I doing this is because I want to know if we can change the replanting regime, would the recovery rate be better? Or can we see not such a big drop? So keep that at the back of your mind, because this is like some of the theoretical stuff. But the most important thing is that for scope 1 for a plantation or a farm, it's going to be very clearly in the zone of what do I do with my fertilizers? And for most planters, looking at this means horrible, they're horrified and they would put more fertilizers in. But being a biologist, so this is where the forest bit comes in, you realize that forest trees are dependent on fungi for their survival. If they don't have this association with particular fungi, those seedlings will never survive. And so what we see in the rainforest is a complex assemblage of fungi interacting with bacteria and plants and trees and all of those different things. And it's not just the communication network, it's an exchange of nutrients, it's an exchange of goods and services. And it's a very complex system. But just bear in mind that these little fellas are the building blocks of all ecosystems. So the association of fungi and bacteria, this pops up in all life forms, including us as humans. Our the human gut microbiome is a fancy word of saying all that bacteria and stuff that lives amongst us is the basis behind our immune system. So the more complexity in your gut microbiome, or gut and human microbiome, the healthier in general you are. So it's no different with a forest ecosystem. And I just said, why can't we do this in the farm? Because in the farm, the same things are happening. But again, a bit of science is that all of the plant sugars that plants make is actually being pushed down into their roots to feed bacteria or whoever's living in that space. And this is connected then to the fungi who are living off this interaction. And it's so intricate that plant roots are calling fungi to come in and get into their root cells. It's almost like they prepare them, like prepare a room, Airbnb in plants is happening. And that association is very important. But you have to understand this, because then all the other things, the practices, the changes, you start understanding why that works. But you have to get this point across. So some of the work that we've done took those theoretical things, but when I go to the big fellas, the big fellas always say, no, cannot, Reza, doesn't work. And they don't want to try. But the fellow who tries are the smallholders. So in some ways, like they had nothing to lose. Go ahead, try whatever you want to do. So that got us from dead soil to living soil. And because we took this from smallholders, we then plunked it into estates that we're working with. And they started seeing that, okay, yields have improved. Soils are better. It's healthier. Sorry. And things were starting to come back to life. So that got us excited because clearly it was working. I can't explain. I mean, I know why. I don't know where to stand. So the point is, we showed that it works, and then we had Tokyo University come in, do the LCA and do da, and then they said, oh yeah, actually compared to conventional farms, you are actually in the good range. You've actually reduced your fertilizer emission, your farm emissions by as much as 60%. So that gave me some confidence. The second thing is then the other thing that we see in farms are in some cases there's available biomass. So there is this drive now, okay, so Nick Nazmi will tell me, okay, Nola, we want an industry, biomass industry. But it's all about selling your products overseas when that material should be fed back to your farm. So to get there, I said, well, let's take what is waste in an oil palm block, do some 3,000-year-old technology recovery, which is go back in the past, people have been doing this, turn this into biochar. Essentially, pyrolysis is just a low oxygen to no oxygen heating, resulting in biochar. And biochar is not necessarily a nutrient. I like to think about this as a structure. It's a structural element. It's supposedly inert. It will stay in your soils for the next 100, 200 years or more. But if you can do this, you access these pores where bacteria and fungi and water and all of those things want to sit in. So after we produce the biochar, we then apply it in the farm. So this was version 1. We don't do this anymore. But the idea here is biochar activated with living organisms is the best way to apply this. And so what you end up with is, on the carbon calculation side, is a positive thing that you can add to your equations. But more importantly, your soils are improving. Farmer is happier, less fertilizer he has to use, less money. Right. Yeah, so actually, we've looked at the large ones, and there's a lot of spaces that can be softened up with nature. Because operationally, there's only your access paths and maybe your circles. But what I see is that there's no big guy willing to see what a different model looks like. Because there is a range between where we are and where the current industry practices. So I think there's some experimentation to be done of how far can you push it to go in this. Correct.
We are actually talking to a lot of these companies which is going towards efficiency. They are going towards automation, right? And when you have to have automation, you cannot have all of this very chaotic environment, because your machines won't be able to go and work. So how would you propose to be able to go and cross that gap?
So like everything, like how we started with this was, we can't deal with generalities, but it's specifics. So in one of our cases, a lot of the ideas were centered around, not all our land is flat. The flat areas are great for mechanization. And then we have hilly areas. And so we needed to adapt a method for this one, for version A and version B. But the fact is, we had a conversation with their operations team, with their R&D team, helped a lot with finding a model that works. So what I'm showing you here are just the building blocks for this. How it looks like in like a state environment is really that next phase we are just starting to open up.
Do you
So
have
I don't have immediate answers.
Maybe one way is that if you can actually show a correlation between the productivity of the plants itself, because of all of the activities that you're putting in, the plants are now coming out 2-3 times the type of produce now.
Yeah.
Correct.
That might actually then justify the investments for you then to look into
Absolutely.
alternative means.
Correct.
Do the automation in that sense.
Correct. So, and actually there's two parts. Productivity, so we've shown that productivity increases. It's the, how much time do you need to put into it? So the other part of productivity is your man hours, or sometimes you can double use the machinery that the existing have, so there's those two parts, clearly, yes.
Just to play devil's advocate again, I think one of the big problems that a plantation owner might have is in terms of labor, because
Correct.
your model would require a bit more labor intensivity, right? And especially Malaysia now looking into like trying to go for less, especially foreign labor. This might be a fly in your ointment, lah.
Correct. But we got there because we see mechanization as being part of the solution. So the misters, there's some methods of doing things will make it so easy. But that works with a certain bunch of fellas. Actually, livestock is the other factor. If you can bring that into the equation for the larger estates on undulating area, that's also another thing. So what I'm saying is these are ideas that we need some space to introduce, trial, and figure out how to do this. But from a calculation point of view, this is what Tokyo University did. So they basically said, when you take away or reduce your fertilizers, you add your biochar and we did it only at this rate, because smallholders can only produce so much, you end up with a 60 to 70% carbon reduction. And we can see that the other opportunities this is where nature comes in. So this idea that rubber trees or other trees is what we can start to address. So the fun thing, again, with the smallholder space is land is there. Finding partners to bring in new crops or future oils are some of the exciting spaces to get into.
So, Reza, can I just... the way to go and attack these large players is always either through your reports or where it hits the bottom line, right? I'm just thinking whether RSPO itself could introduce one aspect in their reporting requirements would be in terms of soil health. And in order for you to go and have a certain level of soil health, all of these sort of things would have to come into play,
Correct.
which would then come into in terms of your reporting.
So we are 4 years away from sitting down to that discussion, because they already launched the new standards out already.
Yeah.
So that boat has sailed, but that conversation is happening. Like, what are those indicators that could be in? Different companies are starting to publish what those indicators look like. And we're just on the front lines of, if you report this, how do you make it happen on the ground? But I think there's...
So just to add to that, there is a requirement for soil health monitoring in the RSPO standard. What is not there is a threshold. And it's not possible to include one in a generic standard because we're talking about the world here. But it is very much possible that, and we are looking into it in the future to look into like thresholds for certain countries. So moving from more of a practice-based standard to an outcome-based standard. That is certainly in the future. But we've got the practices in place. We've given everyone the freedom to achieve it in their own way. But really, if we want to start talking about positive impacts, we need to start looking at outcomes. And that requires baselines and thresholds. And we can have as many research studies as possible, but a research study is still based on what's being practiced. For actually have widespread impact, we need to start looking at outcome-based standards. And that's not just RSPO, but sustainability standards in general.
And I would say, all fine and good, but let's just look at the farm based on something you can actually measure. So basically what Net Ecosystem is doing is, no matter what your practice is, here's your result. So imagine if all of the big companies started looking at this level of detail. You're starting to see how combination of practices results in the outcome that you want. Because at the end of the day, your net ecosystem exchange is on the good side. So this is an example, but you're right. So where was I? So we know that carbon emissions are good. The other thing which we started to look at was just basics of what happens at the soil level. So I said that most soils were hard like this, and it's very, very clear that with more organic matter, with soils start coming back to life, and it's the life part which is the factor. So we're seeing that increase over time, that water is starting to flow back in the systems again. We're seeing increase in worm biomass. And if you know the function of earthworms, you start realizing that they are your bioengineers. So we should stop kind of worshipping these engineering engineers, the Sir somebody or another with a plaque somewhere in London. But we should go back and worship the earthworms again, the traditional wisdoms of the past, and not be afraid to not be experts and to be able to work at the farm level and say, well, my palms are green, it's okay. I don't need an agronomist to tell me that it's good or bad or whatever. So I think that confidence is looking at not just indicators like the satellite image ones, but at indicators which you can relate this to changes in the soil. And the farmers are saying, my leaves look healthier, and I'm getting 1 to 2 metric tons more fruits. So surely something is working. So part of, I think, this whole exploration, so apart from the big boys, we started thinking about how do we incubate these in communities. So my dream is actually to have these little community biotransformation units everywhere. There should be in every kampong. But essentially what it does is it takes waste, turns it into bioactive products in a low-cost DIY way. And sure, you need some money to get it going. But the beauty is, that this is contributing to farm emissions. And then in our case, the biochar will be certified, actually probably the first in Malaysia, where we'll have carbon removal credits from artisanal biochar producers with tradable carbon credits in the matter, literally weeks away from now. So define that a bit. Yeah, so the reason why we went with certified carbon sinks is, that there's some emissions, but the net result of that emission plus the activity that you put it in, blah, 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 the whole picture is okay. So that kind of puts it all into, there is a crisis in terms we need to get our acts together. I've illustrated some ideas of how things need to be moving forward. But in some ways, I'm just trying to position this sort of whole idea of DIY low-cost solutions are what we need to scale up. And in some ways, we're sitting in the middle between where consumers are, where finance is, and this ecosystem on the ground. So much of what I think needs to happen now is use those value chain connections to generate new value. Find where those business cases are, because we have to start investing on this side of the equation. And this is the game that we have started to figure out how to enable. And to me, it sits around the core bit of working directly with mills. because I see them as the most important link in any community. So I'll leave you with, I mean, I don't think you will hear more of me again, but so we don't have to do this. Okay, I'll use it.
Spiral Living Labs is a collection of experiences that we've gained over the last 20 years. In the early days, I guess what caught our attention were simple practices.
Kita tengok ada macam ulat bungkus dekat daun-daun sawit kami tak ada cara lain nak racun, kita tak nak benda tu kimia kan. Lepas tu kita pergi ambil sarang kerengga. Lepas tu kerengga tu dia membiak lah. Sebab tu ulat bungkus pun tak ada lah, kurang lah. Tak ada masalah dekat kebun kami.
我种这种树，这树叫做红毛老林，主要是给那个蚂蚁做窝咯。这种蚂蚁是吃什么虫都吃的，然后是预防那个什么布袋虫啊，还有这些树也是很美嘛啊，这个果也可以吃嘛。
Sekarang ni tengah musim ulat bungkus. Tetapi bila adanya hutan ni jadi tempat perumah pada serangga-serangga tadi. Bila serangga ni telah makan madu-madu ni, dia akan cari ulat-ulat bungkus tadilah untuk dimusnahkanlah.
So once we knew that reducing chemicals, enhancing the microbial diversity within the oil palm block was the way forward, we then started thinking about, well, what other fermented products would be easy to make from readily available material in a sort of low-cost way.
Bila ada masuk X, diorang bagi tunjuk ajar yang sisa makanan boleh diekstrak jadi baja. Kami mula praktikanlah, kami buat dalam kebun. Dan kami nampak lama-lama hasilnya pun kami nampak.
The laran tree grows very long roots into the ground. So it actually does not directly compete for nutrients with the palm tree. The other advantage of planting this tree is actually because of the leaf fall. When you have a leaf fall on the ground, as you can see, there's a very good mulch on the ground. And this actually creates the bioenvironment that we want, the ecology of the forest. And that creates a lot of microbes, a lot of fungus, which also helps to break down nutrients in the ground from the minerals in the soil.
So I guess, we were focused very much on like what can we do inside the farm blocks. But then what we started to notice was that these learnings were being crossed over into their home gardens, into other plants that they were cultivating. So suddenly there's more organic production, there's more food availability, which means that people are consuming much more nutritionally rich food than they did before.
Saya masih juga ada pisang, macam nanas, boleh tanam lah. Lepas tu saya beli ayam kampung.
Saya dikenalkan dengan ini produk melalui bio web Asia lah gitu. Dan cara dia untuk pelihara ini sangat senang, pendapatan pun lumayan.
So what are these practices when brought together? Natural farming, more biodiversity in the oil palm blocks, more revenue for the farmers. This means that at least for the farmers, if they adopt these practices, they will be better off. And that was great at the farm level, but I think when we were looking ahead, we were seeing that what happens if we can combine all these practices? How do we excite a mill to see this as part of their game plan so that we can make sustainable palm oil biodiverse, inclusive, and makes better money for the farmers themselves and also is better for the environment.
So I think that brings us to the end, really. I hope that was coherent. We tried to start with, I guess, the global climate change context, how time is running out. We have this long history with RSPO, and so that's really been, that's 20 years of incubating ideas. We are connected to that system for a very long time. But how also we can innovate beyond the standard. But in some ways, what I like about it is like you're innovating with the smallholders, and maybe they have these solutions which we can use back to transform the industry. That's what I think would be really lovely to see how to put together. I think we can have a round of questions or feedback, or more importantly, is there anything that you have learned today that you think you now see things differently from the beginning? So, last 5 minutes before they chase us out. We're all rushing to get back. Well, you'll just get back to traffic anyway, so what's the point? So, yeah, anything?
Every block, or do you centralize the pyrolysis process?
Centralized pyrolysis. But scaling up, for me, is going to be like working with the big boys.
But then
putting it into the mill.
There's an issue of transporting the fronts.
Then you have other feedstock. Ah, the star pupil.
Here, I think it's you need the mic. Heard that U.S. has withdraw from Paris Agreement deal again. So Trump has trumped the deal again, and I think also early this year that our neighbor country Indonesia has expressed heavily to consider doing the same thing, pulling out from the Paris Agreement. And I think most of you know that Indonesia has long been an agro-intensive nations, with oil palm contribute to their GDP growth and also greenhouse gas emission eventually. So my question is probably rather seeking your commentary on these things, that are we going to follow their footsteps? Because I think Malaysia is the second largest exporter for oil palm product. So I think this is something that will affect way we see agriculture, especially oil palm, to decarbonize and eventually achieve the net zero pathway. So your comment on that?
Yeah, I think a good question. But also you remember 1992 we started, and how long it takes governments to move. And now they're retracting. But along the way, private sector have said, no, we have to do this. And I think what I'm seeing is you can do this with a very strong business case why you're doing it. So to just follow national policies or just follow what other companies are doing, I think we're at a stage now where it's a bit too simplistic. And if companies decide to pull out because whatever this trend is, I think they're missing out, because there's a lot of value to figuring out how to bring that waste back to the soil, how to enhance traceability within their supply base, because this positions their products globally. So what I'm thinking now is, how can you make palm oil irresistible? Not just sustainable and whatever, and just tick a box and I have this report. So you get it to the point where people, they want your product. So I thought that was obvious. Okay. So yeah, video. Yeah. No, but because I had to frame this as a like the carbon story lah. But I think that's the big point. Like this journey for corporates is one thing, but if you can tune it to the communities that live around you, what do they gain? They gain with extra income. They gain with their livelihoods are improving. I have one farmer, our farmer number one, who basically said to me, you know, now I enjoy every day I go for a jogging around around my farm, which I've stopped using chemicals, and I just feel so much happier now. And so his life has changed. Actually, my team is here. So they've been working with Orang Asli communities, small farmers here and there. You tell me, what do you guys see? Aslam.
Yeah, hello. My name is Aslam. So I'm working with Orang Asli since 2019 until now. So currently I'm based in KL, my site in Banting. So yeah, to change the traditional habit to the traditional habit using chemical and all that to something using bio things, it's not easy. But then after they started implement the bio, I can say it changed a lot of their behavior, and what I can say is they happy to receive good knowledge, and what we call is happy for them to change the traditional way to the good way for their life and for their best management practices in oil palm. Yeah.
I think the part which I liked was like say some of these early farmers who adopted, they are now seeing it in their FFB receipts. So they're seeing it from, okay, I used to get 1 metric tons a month or whatever. Now I'm at 2, some months I'm 3. So that yield improvements is clearly something that motivates them, but they realize that they have to put in time. So labor is obviously a problem. But I think our model now is thinking about how do we centralize these community units to supply to a network of farms. Maybe that's more efficient. But that's where I am now, like, you know, trying to think about what that model looks like. Chandler.
Yes, yeah. So I think I just want to add on a point. Of course, thank you for the insightful session as always. So I think personally, I have the opportunity to participate in one of the study tour organized by Wow Asia. So of course, throughout the my experience, it really can see the impact on smallholder. Particularly, I think just now as he's shown, right? One way, of course, is to promote the application of inorganic fertilizer. That's one way, and of course, the application of biochar, and also it also actually help the farmers who cannot afford the chemical fertilizer to also have a way to fertilize the oil palm. So through the interaction with the smallholder, I really can genuinely see they are really grateful for the opportunity all these Wow Asia or the WAX group actually provided to them. So now I think back to Dr. Reza mentioned, I think logically the next step would be how to actually to find a way to commercialize it so that the big players, like I think just now our participant here also raised how the big players or the companies can also use this theory to turn it into implementation to better promote the smallholder inclusivity. I think that's of course the logical next step. Yeah. So thank you.
I have one, Michael.
Yeah, hi. I'm also on a mission to promote biochar for agricultural application. And I was wondering, from your data set, from your trials, how confident are you that it works? I mean, except for narratives, have you done some studies? Have you done some sort of publications in that respect?
Yeah, so I think what we did was we realized actually it's too complex to set up a scientific experiment that there's few variables, multiple replicates, was going to be impossible with a smallholder environment. We took this to estates and they said, no, it's too costly. You got somebody to pay for this, we'll do it. So I got a bit stuck. So what I decided to do was we would take subjective plus a few indicators like this, soil, infiltration, worm counts, etc. I just looked at the data, the team had compiled it. You can't see a big difference whether you use biochar or not. And I think that's the point. It's not one activity. You need a synergistic range of activities to give you the results that you want. And what we're seeing is the intensity of bio correlates with improving yields and the ecosystem indicators. So you can almost see a continuum. The more effort you put in, the more results you're going to get. More effort meaning lots of different things that you do versus just one thing. And I feel like the current discussions around biochar, like this super duper product, misses that point. You know, they always think that that's the one thing. If I put this in, that's going to be better than everything else. And I realized, no, it needs to be a suite of things. And what you'll see at the end is your net ecosystem exchange should show you that you're getting it right. So we need a holistic view of what management practices need to be done. But a way, obviously, to keep track of it and then see how you can correlate that with results. I mean, that's the sort of thing that we've been doing. But we're doing it with, you know, like a fraction of the budget of a university and a fraction of budget of the big fellas. But we're getting there. Okay, any last things from anybody? No? Then thank you very much for coming. Group photo, you must always